Chapter 7. Practical Instructions to Workers. The first requisite for any person who practices spiritual healing, even if only for himself, is a developed spiritual consciousness, because all healing is the result of individual consciousness, yours or mine. It is not dependent on God. It is not dependent on God consciousness or Christ consciousness in the abstract, but upon individual consciousness lifted to the heights of Christ consciousness, which is the God power that makes it possible to do the works of God. If, however, the practitioner does not keep his consciousness filled with truth and love, those who touch him on life's highway will not find him doing the works of God, spreading harmony and peace abroad in the world. Jesus, the greatest spiritual healer ever known, lived, moved, and had his being continuously in the realization of the Father within, and for that reason he could do the works of God and state with conviction, "He that seeth me, seeth him that sent me." Undoubtedly, if at this moment you had a problem and were given the opportunity of choosing a practitioner out of all the world and out of all time, you would immediately turn to Jesus Christ in the complete assurance of receiving your healing. But if it is God who heals, or if it is impersonal, abstract God consciousness or Christ consciousness, why would you particularly want Jesus Christ? Is it not because Jesus Christ, insofar as our knowledge goes, had the greatest degree of unfolded and realized God consciousness? If it were not possible for you to have the aid of Jesus, to whom would you turn then? From your knowledge of Scripture, it would probably be to John and then to Peter or Paul, because they demonstrated in their healing work the tremendous depth of their spiritual capacity and spiritual awareness. Always the healer is the consciousness of any individual who has attained some measure of Christ consciousness, and the measure attained determines the degree of the healing work. There are those who believe that the ability to heal is some special gift conferred upon a few chosen people, and which therefore becomes their exclusive prerogative. But actually, a practitioner is a degree of developed consciousness of truth, and in the degree that he is imbued with truth, will his consciousness have power. By the grace of God, God's consciousness is realized as individual consciousness. But how, you may ask, how do I attain this consciousness? How do I achieve it? How do I bridge the gap from being a businessman or a housewife to becoming an instrument for spiritual healing? At every step of your unfoldment, it is well to remember that no spiritual progress can be made without the grace of God, and that, of yourself, you cannot succeed, regardless of how determined you might be, regardless of how much zeal or how much faith you might have. You must realize that you did not bring yourself to this study, but that something impelled you, and the something that impelled you is within you. Always the impulse comes from within. A great responsibility rests upon those who go into the spiritual healing ministry, and of them is demanded the highest understanding. They will bring the richest blessings to mankind, but they will have heaped upon them all the vilification that the human world can hurl at them. No one should go into this spiritual ministry unless God takes him by the nape of the neck and pushes him into it. And even then, if he can resist the call, he should do so. The spiritual ministry is not his place. It is no place for anyone unless that inner something insists. There is just no other way. All the spiritual courage a person can muster is required to withstand the antagonism the world has for truth and toward those who hold fast to truth. It does not lie within anyone's capacity as a human being to obey a spiritual call, except in proportion as the grace of God is laid upon him, because only then can he have that greater light which is necessary. The practitioner or teacher becomes a transparency for God activity. It is his function to maintain such an awareness of truth that, when a student or patient comes to the consciousness of that practitioner, he will find nothing there but truth and love. For example, if a person brought himself to a practitioner whose consciousness has become a transparency for spiritual wisdom, he would so feel that spiritual activity as to settle down into a state of peace and wholeness. In proportion as a practitioner keeps himself filled with ideas of truth and love, inharmony and discord are eliminated from the experience of those who turn to him for help, and even those who pass him on the street will, in the degree in which they are reaching out, partake of his consciousness, because there is a continuous realization. Since God is my consciousness, and God, or truth, fills my consciousness, and is the substance and activity of it, that truth is the substance of the form of everything within my universe, even if it appears as a tree or a flower, an enemy or a friend. Everything in my universe responds to that awareness. I embrace my universe within my consciousness, a universe formed of and by that consciousness. And because my consciousness is filled with truth, my universe manifests the activity, quality, and substance, the nature and the character of truth, of eternality and immortality. I stand at the doorway of my consciousness, permitting nothing of a discordant nature to enter, maintaining it in its purity as that place through which God flows to all the world. All who enter my spiritual household, my temple, find therein the peace and joy which become the substance of their being, their bodies, or their pocketbooks. This God consciousness envelops them, governs and sustains them, and reveals this truth as the truth of their own individual being, so that they, in their turn, become a law not only to themselves, but to all who look to them for help. Consciousness imbued with truth, rooted and grounded in truth, will do the healing works, whether that consciousness is yours or mine. Everything in your world takes on the complexion of your consciousness, and any degree of inharmony and discord in your world is a reflection of the degree to which world beliefs have been permitted to get past the door of your consciousness. Do you not see, then, now you become a law unto your universe in proportion as the Christ consciousness takes over your life? Every time that an evidence of discord presents itself to you, you must reinterpret it until that conscious reinterpretation becomes a habit and there is no longer any process involved. Whenever anyone asks for help, at least for a year or 2 or 3, you should be willing to give the very best treatment you know how to give. But after a year or 2 of giving hundreds and hundreds, perhaps even thousands of treatments, the truth becomes so embedded and embodied in your consciousness, and you are living in such a high state of consciousness that when somebody asks for help, you are able to simply to respond with, "I am with you," and this will be sufficient treatment. But that will only be possible after you have given enough treatments to have established yourself in the full realization of the truth. The question is often asked, what prevents a healing? Why is the truth not always effective or operative? Why does it take so long in some cases? There are a dozen different answers, none of them entirely satisfactory. One is that the practitioner may not at that moment have risen to a high enough state of consciousness. In some cases, when the disciples had failed to heal, the Master said, "This kind goeth not out, but by prayer and fasting," which leads us to believe that there is a type of claim which does not respond to the ordinary treatment. Something higher is required, something of which only Jesus himself was the master. You will find that there are claims that yield to the practitioner working on the spiritual level that will not yield to a practitioner working on the mental level. There are people who do not receive healings from medicine, and yet, when those same people find a mental science practitioner, they respond very quickly. But on the other hand, there are many people who do not respond to mental treatment and find help only from a practitioner who works on the spiritual plane. Each individual must go within himself, and if he is sincere, he will be led to the practitioner who can meet his need. Sometimes the practitioner, even on the spiritual plane, will fail to meet certain cases. And while that may have to do with the fact that he may not at that moment be on a high enough level of spirituality, it may also be that the patient is not yet ready to yield, to give up his material sense of existence, or whatever is the nature of that state of consciousness that is binding him to the claim. Sometimes the practitioner's work will compel the patient to yield, but at other times he will cling to some state of consciousness which makes it well nigh impossible for him to be healed. There is more to healing than merely the restoration of physical well-being in the body. Sometimes it is much more important that the individual be spiritually awakened than that he have merely a physical healing. In that event, the practitioner may not be able to help him until this occur. But after that, the healing often follows quickly. It is the practitioner's responsibility to continue until the individual awakens, but it is not the practitioner who awakens him. The Christ, through the practitioner's recognition of truth, awakens him. Many treatments are not effective for the simple reason that they are not clean-cut realizations of the truth of being. People make statements of truth, but they are fuzzy about them, and many times their statements are contradictory. A spiritual healer must be as clean-cut in his realization of truth as a musician or mathematician is in his understanding of music or mathematics. One little bit of fuzziness in mathematics results in the wrong answer. One little bit of fuzziness in music and the wrong note is struck. So also, it is vitally important to have a sharp and clear understanding of what the principles of spiritual healing are in order to make treatment effective. Your consciousness of truth will be a law of harmony to your universe, provided it is a clearly defined consciousness. But if it is a fuzzy one, then there will be a fuzzy demonstration because you have applied only a fuzzy or inaccurate concept of law to the situation. The demonstration of harmony is not something for which you can sit idly by and wait. You must do something specific about it, and that something is to maintain the truth of being as the activity of your consciousness. The practitioner becomes a law of harmony unto his patients in proportion to the truth he maintains in his consciousness. But if he allows thoughts of the world to occupy his attention, or if he indulges in a personal sense of I, me, or mine, he will not succeed in his spiritual ministry. A practitioner must come out and be separate. Especially must he rise high in spiritual integrity, because people are entrusting him with the destiny of their souls at a particular stage of their unfoldment. That is a very sacred trust, and to keep it inviolate, the entire world must be given up so that he can live and move and have his being morning, noon, and night in the divine consciousness. Practitioners who are deeply involved in the duties of community or family life can seldom be successful because the needs of their patients and students must take precedence over all other obligations. Only what little time is left after they have discharged the responsibilities of their practice and ministry remains for their families. There is no room in a spiritual ministry for time-consuming social activities. There is no room left for many friends, nor for active participation in community or political life, although no practitioner should ever shirk his duty as a responsible citizen of his community, his nation, and of the world. When a person enters the healing ministry, he must in large measure separate himself from his human contacts in order to hold himself in such a state of spiritual awareness that he is always ready for any and every call made upon him. This life is the life of the soul, and it necessitates a death to the things of the world. Just as the practitioner must not permit his personal relationships, family or social, to encroach upon his time in such a way as to pull him down from a high level of consciousness, so he must also guard against similar encroachments on the part of his patient's or student body. As long as I have been in this work, I have made it a rule that telephone calls be limited to about 3 minutes. The reason for that time limitation is so that others who call will find the line open and that my consciousness will not be cluttered with non-essentials. A practitioner must at all times stand in readiness to accept calls whether day or night. There are no office hours in spiritual healing, except 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That does not mean that a practitioner should allow himself to be called out at all hours of the day or night to make personal visitations, except in exceptional cases. Why should he rush to a patient's side if the problem is only an illusion? If a practitioner is tempted to hurry to a patient's home because of the apparently urgent nature of the call, by his very action he is accepting the appearance, and the case may be lost. On rare occasions, it is permissible to call upon a patient personally, but under most circumstances, the wisest course is for the practitioner to sit at home, live his life in God, always remaining steadfast in spiritual consciousness, and never permitting the fears of the world to upset him. If the practitioner permits himself to accept appearances at face value, then he will be the blind leading the blind, and they will both fall into a ditch. Practitioners must hold themselves aloof from the world. This is not ignoring error. It is relegating error to its rightful place as nothingness, nothing to be feared, nothing to be hated, nothing to be loved, nothing. Spiritual healing is accomplished only by an actual God realization. It has nothing to do with the names of people or with the names of a disease or condition. It has to do with knowing the true identity of those who are appearing to you as patients. As a practitioner, you have no right to be interested in the name of a patient, the name of the disease, or its diagnosis, although no practitioner worthy of the name would ever fail to express kindness, love, and compassion to all those who come to him with their problems. He listens understandingly, but he does not hear because he knows that the all-knowing infinite wisdom, which is the reality of being, knows everything, and it does not have to be told the name of the person or the name of the disease. It is an infinite intelligence which knows the need before you know it and before your patient does. If a person tells you, "I have a headache," there is nothing you humanly can do about it. Or if he says, "I have a footache," you can do no more about that. The same is true if he informs you it is a broken bone or consumption or cancer. What can you do about any of these things humanly? What good is that information to you? What is accomplished by all this listening to rumors? Why permit yourself to accept all these temptations to believe in a selfhood or a law apart from God? Temptations which are all too eagerly thrust upon you by a loquacious patient. The practitioner is far better able to remain in his consciousness of God if he pays no attention to the person, condition, or thing, but instantly realizes this person is a victim of a universal belief from which at the moment he does not know how to extricate himself. If you have any expectation of being a part of a spiritual healing ministry, learn first of all never to condemn those whom you would help. Stop condemning, stop criticizing, stop judging. Judge not after appearances. Lift yourself out of the mesmerism which indulges in condemnation. Everyone has faults, and no one is proud of them. No one desires to perpetuate them, and yet that is the very thing you do if you continue to criticize, judge, or condemn yourself or others. Your function as a practitioner is never to hold an individual in bondage to any of his sins of omission or commission. Even if he commits them 70 times 7, still you must release him 70 times 7. There must be understanding on the part of the practitioner. There must be compassion. There must be love. And that means understanding and compassion whether the patient is sinning or sick. In the degree that you can live and behold those about you without condemnation, always maintaining the attitude of, neither do I condemn thee, do you lift yourself and others from the burden of their errors, and that sets you and them free to receive God's grace. In this way, the condemnation of mortality is lifted from yourself and others, and man is revealed as the very image and likeness of God. That likeness constitutes your being and mine. It is the being of every saint who has ever lived, and of every sinner. The Master came that sinners might be redeemed, even more than that good people might be made a little better. No sinner is ever cast out eternally. No sinner is ever without redemption. One of the great functions of the Christ is to redeem, to restore, and to regenerate that which is lost, whether it is the lost crops, the lost years of the locust, the lost health, or the lost morals. There could be no physical healing if there were not also spiritual regeneration. When you restore one, you restore the other. They are both part and parcel of one whole. If you hold man in condemnation to his faults, you will push him further down into the ground, where he will never have an opportunity to rise up into wholeness of spirit, mind, and body. Look into your patient's or student's heart and mind, and there find God enthroned. Until you can see that the person standing before you is God made manifest, you will be looking for God to do something for somebody, and that will defeat your purpose. Every time you are led to believe that your patient needs help, your spiritual vision is blurred. It is blurred in exactly the same way as was that of the man who was sitting at a bar with a friend drinking, and who turned to the other, chiding him, "You had better stop drinking, your face is getting blurred." So it is that every time you direct your treatment to somebody out here, it is not the patient's face that is blurred or his body that is sick. It is your vision, your spiritual vision, that is blurred, because it is you who are seeing the other person incorrectly. Some of your patients will give you a hard battle before they yield, but do not be ensnared by any such resistance and be led to conclude that they are a little too wicked, or a little too materialistic, or a little too unloving. Do not be trapped into judging by appearances. You prove your readiness for God's ministry by being able to look any and every appearance in the face without judgment. Even if you have to continue looking at it for years, keep right on realizing, thou art the Christ of God. Thou art pure spiritual being. Christ sits enthroned in thy being. Thy mind is an instrument for God. Thy body is the very temple of God. God is the soul of thy being. Do not forget to take into consideration all three parts of your patient's being, the spirit or soul, the mind, and the body. First of all, understand God to be the soul, the spirit, and the life of all being. Realize that the mind of every individual is an instrument through which God functions, and that the body is the temple of the living God. Then you are beholding a whole man, spirit, mind, and body, all one, all parts of the whole, and that whole is God. The practitioner is an instrument through which the voice of God utters itself, and his word is quick and sharp and powerful. Let nobody believe that his own word is quick and sharp and powerful, because nobody has risen to that point yet. Even Jesus Christ said, quite unashamedly, and with true humility, "I can of my own self do nothing." The practitioner must never be so puffed up with self-importance as to assume the duties or functions of God and think that he knows what is right for his patient, or can tell him what is right, or explain how he can bring harmony into his patient's experience. It is not the prerogative of the practitioner to enter the human scene with his human judgment and attempt to decide how a problem should be resolved. It is not the practitioner's wisdom that heals the patient, but his power, the power of God. Therefore, the function of the spiritual healer is to pray. He must become receptive and responsive, become a transparency, and then he comes, whose right it is, quick and sharp and powerful, changing the body in the twinkling of an eye. If the metaphysical teaching of the last century has proved anything at all, it is that any person who seriously wants to be a healer can become one, not easily always. To some that consciousness comes very quickly, to others slowly. But it is obtainable by anybody who is determined enough to have it. It has nothing to do with any mysterious outside God. It has nothing to do with any mysterious outside powers. It has to do with the degree of developed spiritual consciousness of the individual.